record. And that's pretty much it from me for now. So I'm going to hand over to Lade, who is going to take you through the first half of today's session.
Thanks, Rami. Sorry, just clicking on to the next slide. Sorry, Rami, you might need to help me with this one. Thanks very much. So following the killing of George Floyd in 2020 and the global high-profile reaction that followed, many organisations started to question how they might address inequalities within their own industries. And the ASA, from its perspective, as the UK's advertising regulator, tasked itself to take meaningful action to tackle the potential harms caused by racial and ethnic stereotype in ads. Now, as a first step, we undertook a review of cases that related to race and ethnicity over a 7-year period. And this did offer support for the way the advertising codes have been interpreted and applied in these cases over the years. It also revealed some important areas for further consideration and investigation. And these learnings informed the Racial and Ethnic Stereotyping project. So moving on to the key project strands. So the project operated over 3 primary strands. The first strand was the complaints review and online media insights. So we continued monitoring trends in complaints submitted by the public and also sought additional intelligence using the services provided by the digital consumer intelligence company Brandwatch to review which ads people had been discussing online. The second strand was the literature review and call for evidence. We undertook desk research and analysis of existing literature and sought views from a range of stakeholders. And the third strand was public opinion research. And we'll now explain each strand in detail. So the complaints review, in September 2020, the ASA undertook a review of its decisions in 518 cases, arising from complaints about depictions of race and ethnicity, which were received between January 2013 and June 2020. In identifying cases to consider in the scope of the review, the ASA took quite a broad approach. So it reviewed complaints relating to the depiction of BAME people, which included those relating to the depiction of traveller and Jewish communities. The review identified several key themes that had consistently raised about the depiction of people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, including the extent to which those depictions in individual ads, which might seem to be on the right side of the line in isolation, might be contributing to a cumulative effect of offence or harm. So the key themes are on the next slide, and these include first, depiction of roles and characteristics. So this related to stereotypical portrayals that linked negative behaviours with people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, such as showing South Asian men as sexual predators or linking Black men to criminality, as well as depictions that place specific attention on exaggerated mannerisms, particularly in relation to the perceived mocking of accents. Now, the second key theme was objectification and sexualization. Now, generally, the ASA receives many complaints about the sexualization and objectification, particularly regarding white women. However, the review identified a few complaints regarding how people from a range of racial and ethnic backgrounds were portrayed, the majority of which concern the depiction of Black people, either Black men in the size of their genitals or the sexualization of Black women. Now, in regards to culture, the review showed that when ads included people from cultures other than British, they were often featured in a way that mocked, denigrated, or otherwise insensitive to that culture. Now, common concerns under this theme related again to the exaggeration and mocking of accents, as well as using lazy references to culture, instances of cultural appropriation, and the use of imagery reminiscent of colonialism and imperialism. With regards to the use of humour, an overarching theme was the balance between humour and defence. Now, we acknowledge humour is frequently used in advertising, and light-hearted depictions of certain stereotypes can be well received. However, the use of humour does not render all racial and ethnic stereotypes inoffensive or unproblematic, and was an issue we were really keen to explore in a bit more detail. So now, moving on to the consumer insights and Brandwatch. The project team also sought additional intelligence using the services provided by Brandwatch, which is mentioned previously as a digital consumer intelligence company, which provides access to consumer insights from online sources and other social networks, including, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, the team used Brandwatch to review which ads people were discussing, either positively or negatively online, and identify the themes emerging from those discussions. So a broad search was created to capture UK-based conversational advertising when mentioned alongside identifiers for ethnic minorities. Those identifiers included a wide range of terms denoting race and religion, including disparaging terms. This data was then segmented into 3 general categories: appropriation, discrimination and representation, and by specific offence types such as racism, sexism, objectification, and xenophobia. Now, each segment was reviewed over a time period for recurring themes in conversation and to identify specific adverts being mentioned by UK audiences. To ensure all conversation was UK-based, Twitter served as a primary content source for the analysis. Now, while all conversation was UK-based, not every ad discussed originated in the UK. So the key themes identified in this were consistent with the findings in the review. However, other key insights included that representation in advertising was definitely the most discussed theme. As Black and minority representation in UK advertising has grown, there's been some controversy surrounding the issue. Some believe that the share of representation should be reflective of the population and argue it's discriminatory to favour a minority based on their ethnic background, whether casting an advert or recruiting for a role. Asian communities also expressed concerns about the lack of representation of their own communities. The review also highlighted that Asian women, as well as Black women, are fetishised and objectified in Western media, and Muslim women felt their appearances were reduced to just their headscarves. Finally, comments showed online support for increased representation of Muslims, and ads that did not draw specific attention to the race or ethnicity of the person depicted were particularly well received. So moving on to the call for evidence and literature review. So the primary aim for the call for evidence was to seek views from a variety of stakeholders to help us establish whether, and if so, to what extent racial and ethnic stereotypes when featured in ads may contribute to real world harms. We found from the responses that there was an awareness of the importance of representation in ads, as well as the way in which people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds are portrayed. Diversity in ads themselves, and within those working in the industry more widely, was highlighted as a key element of ensuring accurate representation and a feeling of social inclusivity. Turning to the literature review, it soon became clear that there was little general consensus about not only the subject of stereotypes, but also how their information and effects interacted with ideas of race and ethnicity in an advertising context. However, we did find the literature suggested that use of negative stereotypes is harmful to minorities, with academics arguing that stereotypes can distort or harm the representation of those represented groups and potentially silence their voices. Our review noted that there was a relative lack of academic scholarship, which explained how issues such as religion might interact with racial and ethnic stereotyping, and also noted that further research in those areas might be valuable. So in terms of the key findings from both the call for evidence and literature review, we found that when racial and ethnic minorities are represented in a stereotypical way, it can often lack nuance or be inaccurate. And there are important differences into how racial and ethnic minorities are individually or comparatively portrayed, which could lead to different and potentially harmful real-life outcomes. There is the potential for these issues to be further conflated or reinforced with other issues such as objectification and sexualization, and are examined in conjunction with one another. These issues further intersect with other issues relating to a consumer's identity or beliefs, such as their gender, religion, or culture or class. And our findings also noted that even when stereotypes are used by advertisers to dispel or challenge negative ideas, or if they're perceived in a humorous manner, they still have the potential to cause serious offence or harm. I'll now pass on to Kam. who will be going over the next segment.
Thanks, Lade. So the primary focus of the research was to look at the potential for widespread or serious offence or harm arising from stereotypes associated with race and ethnicity in ads. It was important for us to look at this from the perspective of members of racial and ethnic minority groups. And so given the breadth of groups we hope to cover, the design of our research programme was particularly significant. We undertook a two-stage approach. The first consisted of 22 mini groups split by age, gender and ethnicity, involving 105 participants from across the UK, across all the nations of the UK as well, including specific subgroups within the larger Black and Asian groups to represent, for example, Indian or Black Caribbean respondents. We used over 40 different ad executions covering different media, product sectors, and featuring different racial and ethnic minority groups to aid our group discussions and understand how audiences might assign the potential for harm or offence. This was followed by a quantitative stage with over 2,000 respondents aged 13 or over taking part in our online survey. We included a booth sample of just over 1,000 Black, Asian and other minority ethnic group respondents so that we were able to look at the individual results of some of those larger groups in more detail. Our report emphasises the importance of terminology and the language used when talking about race and ethnicity. We explained that we've used terms such as BAME in our reporting for brevity and simplicity, particularly when presenting quantitative findings, but that we recognise the distinct and divergent groups within this broad group. The research provided us with some rich and fascinating contextual insights, which are useful for helping analyse our findings on harm and offence. Firstly, we found that some groups are much more aware of being members of a distinct group and are therefore more invested in how they are seen and portrayed by others. Overall, BME respondents were more than twice as likely as their white counterparts to say ethnicity is the most important factor to their identity. Religion was also disproportionately more important for BME respondents and over 4 times more likely to be mentioned than white respondents as the most important factor. We found that while advertising is not seen as important as other spaces such as education and employment as an influence on how people see themselves and how they feel others see them, it is seen as having an impact. We also found that the representation and portrayal of minority groups in ads is not seen as a front of mind issue with little spontaneous recall of problematic advertising. However, when we asked specific questions, we found that BME groups are almost 3 times more likely to feel under or not represented at all in ads. Over half of BME respondents feel they are not portrayed accurately. And of those, just over a half feel people from their ethnic group are negatively portrayed. On a positive note, however, there is a sense that things are improving and there's been a change for the better in the representation and portrayal of minority groups in recent years. There's also widespread agreement from research participants from across the UK and across all groups that advertising today should be inclusive of different racial and ethnic groups, and that given its commercial function and the economic endorsement that comes with featuring people from different groups, such ads recognise different groups are worth targeting. As one quote puts it, you just think in Britain today, the ads will show all sorts of people, all of us, not just a tick box or a stereotype, but real people. After all, we're all customers now. It was felt advertising plays an important role in holding up a mirror and showing normal people. There was a suggestion that while news and current affairs showed elite leaders outside our world or just bad news, entertainment and sport featured standout individuals, important role models, but they weren't like us. Ads were seen to be an area where you expected to see people you could relate to. When looking specifically at the influence of ads featuring people from different ethnic groups, The study found BAME respondents were significantly more likely to feel ads showing people from their ethnic group are likely to impact on how society sees them and how they see themselves. Taking all these views into consideration, it appears in some ways there are higher expectations for advertising in terms of how race and ethnicity is represented and portrayed, particularly in showing what was often referred to as normal everyday people. Using a number of different ad executions as stimulus material to help discussions, we then went on to explore the issues of harm and offence related to stereotypical or inaccurate portrayal. The findings of this exercise have been grouped into three broad themes: the reinforcement of existing stereotypes, the creation of new stereotypes, and the perpetuation or reinforcement of racist attitudes and behaviours. It's useful to note that there was a spectrum of reaction to the ads shown, with some consistently rejected and criticised for poor portrayals, those that gained widespread positive feedback, and those that brought about more ambiguous reactions. And it was often comparisons with the positive examples that help participants articulate the potential harms associated with other ads. The first theme, the reinforcement of existing stereotypes, was often characterized as always showing us the same way, with examples related to the roles and characteristics of individuals, such as showing Asian men as shopkeepers or taxi drivers and Black people in colorful clothing. Respondents pointed out that they felt minority groups were also seldom the boss or in roles of authority or indeed the customer. As summarized by a quote from a young Black male participant, normally you never see a Black or brown person buying an expensive car. We saw some generational differences across our groups, with older respondents simply content with being shown on screen, while younger respondents were more likely to voice their frustrations at these stereotypes. The following ad is an example that was felt to demonstrate this theme and the idea of reinforcing existing stereotypes.
Bingo like a boss and get boss benefits with rewards, discounts, and more when you play Gala Bingo.
Having looked at this ad in the focus groups, it was one of 6 ads we tested further in the quantitative study, and we found that white respondents were less positive about this ad overall than BAME respondents when we asked whether they liked the ad. While it was generally felt that the ad was unlikely to cause harm to people from ethnic minorities, Black respondents did have the highest score for very likely to cause harm at 16%. The qualitative findings showed that while the ad was often seen as good-humoured, there was an undercurrent of concern about the way the characters were portrayed. As a young Black female participant put it, stereotypical, barbers and ridiculous hairstyles, I feel they are making a laughingstock out of us. In comparison, this next ad was widely praised because of its focus on an individual who happened to be Asian and was talking about his father and family in a way that had little to do with their origin, race, or ethnicity, and indeed focused on a human story. As a participant in a young Asian female group put it, he's Asian, the family is, but that is all beside the point. It's not about them being different because of their Asianness, it's about being the same as anyone, so it applies to everyone.
I remember Dad's dance moves. His killer tash. Dad was just a really happy character. But I also remember when they asked if he wanted to be an organ donor. And I just didn't know.
Your loved ones will always be involved. Talk to them about organ donation. Leave them certain.
In terms of potential for serious or widespread offence or harm, this theme was felt to have the potential for others to see people from minority groups as different to the mainstream by othering or reinforcing the idea that entire groups are a certain way, rather than communicating their individuality. In addition, it was felt there was the potential to adversely impact on others' expectations and the self-perceptions of people from BAME communities by creating a limiting set of beliefs about what is expected from people across these groups. In terms of harm too, participants spoke of a sense that through the creation of new stereotypes, a one-dimensional picture of people from minority groups is being created in advertising, particularly around the depiction of family life and relationships and people's appearance. For example, while participants supported the depiction of integrated relationships, there was frustration at the lack of Black families shown. Many Black and Asian participants felt that when shown, lighter-skinned people were more likely to feature in ads, representing this as a norm. And for some, the use of the hijab was often mentioned as a shorthand way of depicting Muslim or Asian women. Participants also felt that on occasion, the characters did not demonstrate a credible personality and were almost devoid of individuality and not fully integrated into the storyline, suggesting the character was more likely to represent a stereotype or even just tick a box. As one Asian woman put it, you see a girl in a hijab as part of a collage with other people, and it looks as if they've just put her there to tick a box. It doesn't make any sense. The Sainsbury's Christmas ad was spontaneously mentioned in many groups as a positive example and an outlier in showing a Black family, but the apparent backlash against it was also noted. And in contrast to the negative reactions to the featuring of women in a hijab as a stereotype, this next ad featuring a woman wearing a hijab was praised for a number of reasons. The fact that she was shown working from home, a situation many were able to relate to during the pandemic. Much like the organ donation ad, it focused on one individual. And most importantly, it clearly showed someone of Asian origin behaving in a natural and credible but not stereotypical way.
To all our customers, if you need a repayment holiday on your TSB, mortgage, loan or credit card, get in touch to apply and we'll do everything we can to help wherever we are. Thank you. We believe in people helping people. Find out more at tsb.co.uk.
Around the start of the fieldwork, there was media coverage of this next ad, which was felt to feed into the idea of creating stereotypes around Black people.
KFC flavoured crisps. It's a no-brainer. So why did it take us so long? Sometimes, spotting something obvious takes a while. Even if it's something so blindingly clear.
Walker's Max and KFC.
It's amazing we ever missed it. Something staring us right in the face. Something that just makes perfect sense. Walker's Max KFC. Get a 2-for-1 KFC with every bag. Mad.
As one quote suggested, it's embarrassing. A barber's, a chicken shop. Is that all they know about Black people? It's not horrible, just obvious. But in comparison, the following ad was more positively received with the quote, the guy with the Spice Girls, he's Asian, a bit typical, but not a stereotype. He loves the Spice Girls, not Bhangra. It's different, a bit of fun.
We are live with the Spice Girls. We're outside the house with the Spice Girls' best ever fan. We're about to surprise them with the VIP tickets to their tour.
There's my house. You're my house. Spice Girls. Bring them out. Mom, Spice Girls are here.
Yeah, you are coming on our tour.
See this? Mom, the Spice Girls in the house. I don't believe this.
Oh, can I have a quiz?
Biscuits instead, they taste.
I'll just have a crisp.
No, leave the crisp.
No.
Please. Huh?
Give the crisp.
Huh? No.
Ow. Oh. Please give them one crisp.
Strong.
Right, thank you. I thought you were our biggest fan.
But the...
He's necked him! He's necked him! Ooh.
Where you going?
We're going? Yeah. You should have shared your crisps, Dev.
Come on, man.
Son, you should have shared your crisps.
Mum!
Oh, Dev, it's not you. Our best ever cheese and onion is now even harder to share. When it comes to the crunch, it must be Walker's.
The main reason behind the difference in reaction to these different ads was found to centre around the point of authenticity and personality, as opposed to stereotype and caricature, introducing us to a new and individual character who you recognise as having an individual personality rather than relying on easy and obvious associations. This theme was seen to have the potential to create a new set of limiting perceptions of people from minority groups. It was suggested that harm one centered on using existing stereotypes widely present in culture, repeating already strongly rooted notions and helping to perpetuate them. And in contrast, harm two was seen to be creating new cultural ideas or using ideas that are perhaps not unknown in a way that helps to normalize it as an idea. And by using them enough, there was likely to be overlap between harm one and harm two in the future. The third harm, perpetuating or reinforcing racist attitudes and behaviours, respondents from all backgrounds had a strongly held objection to ads showing such behaviours, even when it was apparent that the advertiser's intent was in fact to use such depiction to challenge racist attitudes and behaviours. It was felt that just the inclusion of this type of portrayal had the potential to reinforce stereotypes, and that while some ads were clearly reinforced racism were viewed as wrong and widely objective, strong opinions were often expressed when we looked at these more ambiguous depictions of racism. This following ad for an army recruitment drive was an example of this.
Have you seen her? So slow.
Manual's useless.
Sounds like a perfectionist to me. Always run with someone like that here!
You, come here.
Resilience.
We need that. Come on, chop chop.
Slow and steady.
Hello, 2-1 Alpha. This is Whiskey Tango.
4-1 Alpha.
Eyes on target. Unshakable!
Nothing's me!
Patience. Always welcome.
This ad was also included in the quantitative stage as one that had already created strong and mixed feelings in the qualitative sessions where it was examined, and we wanted to get a sense of the scale of reactions to it. Amongst those who had been positive about it, it demonstrated the resilience of the main character. Others felt the depiction of the abuse was wrong and harmful and encouraged racist behaviour, even though they could see the attempted motivational message of the ad. There is a balance in favour of the ad, unlikely to cause harm across the board, but again, we see a real split of opinion, with Black and mixed respondents equally likely to give a strong positive or strong negative answer, while among white respondents, the balance of opinion is more positive than negative. When asked whether they liked the ad, the strongest negative feelings were most felt amongst the mixed ethnicity group, followed by Black respondents. A quote from a young Black male suggests, "It's so wrong to be showing that. We feel for her, being bullied by two white people, but what kind of message does it send? I know the idea she has risen above it, but honestly, what are they thinking? How do they think we feel being looked down on every day, or wondering what people are thinking and saying?" In terms of the potential harms associated with this theme, it could be seen as implicit reinforcement of those attitudes amongst people who still hold them, and it was felt that such depictions could also serve as a very painful reminder of the reality of racism that many may have experienced. In the quantitative study, these learnings were developed further by looking at 10 specific elements of characterization or storytelling in ads that could give rise to potential harm or offense. We asked respondents to categorize elements as either having no effect, just irritating, causing upset or anger, which we've interpreted as offense here, or causing harm. This chart shows the response of the whole UK sample, and in the main, results for BAME and white respondents were similar. We found that around a third of all respondents felt that all 10 elements, including humour at the expense of ethnic groups, could cause upset or anger, shown in red. There was greater variance in the responses when looking at whether these elements could cause harm, shown in the light blue, with half of all respondents saying that discrimination towards particular ethnic groups or showing ethnic groups in a degrading way could have this effect. This was followed by elements showing ethnic groups as outsiders and their sexualization of ethnic groups. While making fun of accents and religious references were seen to be less likely to cause harm, it's important to note BAME respondents were significantly more likely than their white counterparts to say that these two elements were likely to cause harm. So that's a very quick summary of the key findings of the public research. The report is available on our website, and if you haven't had the chance to already, hopefully you'll be interested in taking a look at the findings in more detail after today. I'll now hand back to Robneet, who will take us through the next steps of the ASA.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kam and Lade. So before moving on to questions, I'm just going to touch briefly on what these findings mean for the ASA and CAP and what our next steps are going to be. So firstly is interpreting trends in the data. We're going to be giving more thought to some of the insights we gleaned from the research. So for example, one finding from the qualitative phase of the public research was that all members of each of the groups interviewed did not necessarily share the same views about whether particular depictions or portrayals in the ads we showed them were offensive or harmful. For example, some people viewed ads that showed a range of body types as positive and inclusive. Others thought that a focus on a particular body type could be stereotyping or imply unnecessary sexualization. We'll also be reflecting on the learnings from the project and considering whether certain portrayals that might have been acceptable in the recent past continue to have a place in advertising in the 21st century. We'll also continue to analyse trends in the complaints we receive and review our case handling process. In addition to this, the evidence gathered over the course of the project provides a knowledge base for identifying stereotypical portrayals that could pose a risk of harm to consumers. The ASA has asked CAP and BCAP to consider this evidence and explore whether additional guidance is necessary to encourage creative treatments that challenge or reject potentially harmful stereotypes and diminish issues arising from cumulative effects. And finally, in the event that new CAP guidance on racial and ethnic stereotypes is introduced, CAP will deliver training and advice to assist advertisers in ensuring that their ads are compliant. And by sharing the findings from the project, the ASA hopes to provide greater clarity on scenarios which may lead to inadvertent harm or serious offence being caused. So now moving on to questions. So we did have some questions submitted in advance that I think we have covered during the course of the session. But one question just to start things off with is, how does the ASA feel about positive discrimination? This individual feels that it is necessary, but many people don't get it or find it unfair. Kam and Lade, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, so from our perspective, it's a bit difficult because the ASA's remit is primarily focused on, it doesn't really cover representation, it's more focused on portrayal. We did acknowledge that it was representation obviously was going to be a topic that did come up and in this project, and we do feel like the research did show that people, some groups did feel that they were underrepresented or not represented at all. And we think the research shows that representation is not enough. And actually how characters are portrayed is crucial, which is why we hope that the project will help advertisers who are looking to increase diversity in their advertising, because we know that there were fears shared that, that people felt that they might inadvertently cause harm or offence. So we hope that this work will help guide advertisers to ensure that that's not the case. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you, Lade. And another question's come through here that is probably more for you, Kam. Did the study look at how ads were received by diverse audiences? Are representative ads more effective than those that aren't? And is there anything we can do more above and beyond representation?
Yeah, so I think, it's kind of linked to the question that Lade's just answered. As you can see, we did test the number of ads, and what we did was, for each different type, in the qualitative stage, for each group, we showed ads featuring people from those corresponding groups, but also other groups. So, for example, the people in the Black groups were shown ads showing Black, featuring Black people, but also, say, for example, Asian characters as well. We didn't really look at the effectiveness of ads. Obviously, we were looking at how specifically those characters were portrayed. And as Lade said, it's quite difficult to do this kind of research without talking about representation. But representation isn't within sort of the ASA's remit. And what really came out was that while there are groups who definitely say, we feel underrepresented or not represented at all, much of the commentary was, where you start to talk about, comments referencing tick boxing, suggests that, representation on its own isn't enough. And it is actually when you then, I think someone's talked about in one of the quotes that I referred to, being shown as part of a collage. So it's about sort of, is it a tick box? Is it tokenistic, or how are those characters actually portrayed? And that's where we see some of those more positive examples, like the organ donation ad, where yes, there's an Asian character, but it's just about the story and how he comes across. That is also important alongside the representation.
Perfect, great, thank you, Kam. I hope that answered the question. We've had another question here which links directly to what we're talking about. So someone's asked, what are the differences in representation versus portrayal?
Okay, so when we spoke to research participants, the way we explain it is representation is looking at sort of how much or how often someone is shown in an ad, whether across media. So just how much they're shown, and portrayal is specifically looking at how they are shown, and so how their character is comes across. So they're the differences about sort of the amount you're shown, but also how you're shown. So they're the key differences.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Kam. I don't know if anybody else has any other questions, but we do have time for more questions. So do feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. Like I mentioned, the session today has been recorded. So I will circulate a copy of the recording and slides to everyone after the session. And it will be available on our website as well. And I'll also share a link to the report as well, so you can have a look at that too. I think we've had another question here. So again, I think this is related to the research in particular. So Kam, another one for you. Someone's asked, how qualified were respondents to really determine whether ads in question could cause harm? It's quite a complicated thing to understand the cultural effects of advertising, and most non-practitioners may not have the skills or knowledge to make an accurate prediction of that. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I guess that's consumer research. I think the important thing for us was in this project is the sort of multi-strand approach that we took. So as well as having the consumer research, we had the literature review, and so there was a breadth of sort of sources that we went to. And it was important for us to look at this from the public's point of view, and because that's sort of at the crux of the whole project. And so, in terms of how qualified respondents were, it is their personal view and how they feel that ad impacts them, if it does. So it's not necessarily, a direct sort of, because they say we have to gain those, we have to look at those opinions and understand those and take those into consideration alongside the codes that we have. And so, you know, they do help inform us. And totally understand that it's complicated to sort of say that they have the knowledge to make an actual prediction of that, but it is their own personal view, and it was important for us to look at that from the viewpoint of those groups being shown in ads.
Yeah, perfect, great, thanks, Kam. And another really interesting question here: was there an ad that provoked a particularly strong negative response, and why?
I think there were a couple which are shown in the report. One on which we'd actually I think it had come up as a complaint, which was a poster, I believe, or a press ad feature. Let me just bring up the full details of it. It was for a I think it was a cab company. Lade, can you? I think it was a Lings car ad.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I think the army recruitment ad had you know, there were some strong feelings. Again, there were the mixed feelings within that. You know, the report sort of features quite a lot of them. Yeah, there was one, I think, for a car company which referenced.
It was for it was a car leasing company.
Yeah, that's it.
Black cars matter. It said once you go black, you never go back, and it's talked about the car having a big gear knob, and it was that Audi A4 Black Power Edition.
Yeah.
And includes a raised fist in the image as well.
Yeah, that's one that was particularly strong feeling. And there was another one which was, I believe, a Home Office ad about knife crime, which featured a young black or mixed race boy on the poster, and talking about sort of ending knife crime. So that was another one that also achieved quite a sort of negative feedback.
Perfect, great, thanks, Kam. Someone has asked, will racial stereotyping be part of the ASA code? Can ads be in breach if they are perceived as being stereotypical?
So we actually already have a code rule regarding we caution advertisers about causing serious offence on the grounds of all the protected characteristics, which would obviously encompass race as well. Whether we introduce a separate code rule, as we did with gender stereotyping, is still in discussion. And also our focus isn't necessarily on whether an ad is necessarily, it's about whether an advertiser presents a negative stereotypes. We understand that stereotypes are presented in advertising all the time. Our concern is just making sure that trying to discourage advertisers from creating ads that have negative stereotypes in them, which is essentially, yeah, that's kind of what our main focus is on, basically.
Perfect, great, thanks, Lade. Someone else has asked, how can we avoid the checkbox syndrome of digital media, where it looks like BAME have been included for the wrong reasons? She said, not sure if it makes sense, but I think that does make sense. Hopefully you'll be able to answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, as the research has shown, there are lots of things at play here. You know, you had sort of older respondents saying, well, at least we're shown on screen. Younger respondents saying, well, okay, we're shown, and that's great, but actually how we're shown is important. And so, and you know, there was a slight frustration at sort of, you know, collage type ads where lots of different people from different backgrounds are shown. So I think it's just you know, what is the purpose of showing the different characters that you do? Be authentic about it, you know, and just, you know, the way you show different groups. You know, I think it comes down to the authenticity around it. Is it just to tick a box? or are they actually part of the ad? Are they part of the storyline? And sort of, and I can understand sort of digital media. I mean, we've had one example where we had a TV ad, which was a government sort of NHS COVID awareness ad. It was a TV ad which received fairly positive feedback, but the poster ad that came about from that TV ad received negative feedback because of the still that it showed, and it showed a Black woman speaking to a white woman, and sort of the COVID particles coming out of the Black woman's direction. So, you know, there are sort of, you know, what you can show in a still versus what you can show in a TV, in a visual ad and in a video ad. I can understand the differences and the difficulties there, but I think it's just being careful about, you know, the purpose of the character, and just being aware of, you know, what the research has shown and what to be aware of when you're sort of compiling those ads.
Perfect, great, thanks Cam. Someone else has asked, so some of the ads we researched seem to have both positive and negative responses, the army recruitment one being a case in point. This person's asked, how do we help advertisers to get it right with this research if there are contradictory results? And how do we make sure we don't dilute advertising to ineffective and lacking in ideas and real cultural authenticity?
Shall I take one, Lade?
Yeah, I can take the second bit.
I mean, I think that's something clearly that we've shown in the research, that there are sort of these ambiguous reactions. We've tried our best to sort of pull out what it is within those sort of positive and negative responses, so that it gives you an idea of exactly what comes across well, what doesn't come across so well, and we hope that the research does that. And you know, it's important for us that this research helps the industry. You know, as I said, you know, people have seen, respondents themselves were saying things are moving in the right direction. There have been positive changes, and this very much, this research is to help that process further along, rather than sort of you know, cause issues with sort of progressing that positive change. And so, you know, we do hope that we're picking out the kind of crux of what's worked, what's not worked, to help avoid those situations.
In regards to the second point about making sure you don't dilute advertising, and really able to celebrate cultural authenticity, I mean, our project isn't to discourage that. We saw from the research, we had examples. For example, I believe there was a Tesco ad came about sumac chicken, and I believe, I can't remember what holiday it was regarding, but there was a group of Asian men just seeking guidance from their aunt as to how to prepare the food for that particular holiday. That was a great example of an advertiser basically just showcasing what it's like to just be cooking food for a particular holiday and celebration without relying on stereotypes or just making it seem like it's a checkbox exercise. So as Cam mentioned previously, it's all about just being authentic, and basically just making sure that the ads don't go as far as to present people in a negative stereotypical way, that just, you know, just relying on stereotypes that are just pretty old-fashioned and the rest of it. I mean, the beauty is that we live in a country that has many different cultures and experiences, and we don't want to discourage advertisers from showing them in their ads, which is why we're here to support anyone that has any questions or concerns regarding that.
Perfect, great. Thanks, Kam and Lade. I think that answered that question well. I don't know if anybody else has any further questions. I'll just give it a couple of seconds in case people do. But of course, as Lade said, we're always here to support with any further questions that you might have. And I'll include some details on how to get in touch with us in a follow-up email when I circulate the slides and recording for today's session as well. I don't think we have any further questions, so I think we will probably wrap up here. But thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you found the session useful, and big thank you to Kam and Lade for leading on today's webinar as well. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and keep a lookout for the email that I will send round too.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.